The Interventions module allows teachers to track RTI interventions and documentations for your students. This replaces the RTI tracker if your campus was using this tool. The documentation and notes in this module will follow the student from grade to grade and will be accessible to teachers who have the student rostered to them in teams or who have full campus access. To access the Interventions module, click on the green box with a white arrow that says Interventions. The first step in the intervention process is identifying the student. You can search for the student by last name, by first name, or by ID. Just type one part of the student's name in order to search for that particular student. Then click on the green box with the white arrow. Now we are in a demo or test environment, so these are not actual PISD students, nor is it actual PISD data. From here, find the student that you are identifying as an RTI student. So I'm going to identify this particular student as RTI in reading. This student has already been identified in math, and you'll notice that the Tier 2 designation is already here for this student, along with a date that they were Tier 2 and their progress so far in the RTI process. You can click on Reading, Math, Science, Social Studies, or Behavior to identify a student as RTI, and you can identify a student in multiple areas if necessary. Since this student has already been identified as Tier 2 in Math, I'm going to identify this student as Tier 2 in Reading. So I'm going to click where it says Reading. From here, the program will not allow you to do anything else until you press Start. Start tells this module that you are going to start intervention for this particular student. This is used just for initial identification or to update a tier of a student. This process may be done at commit or at a kid talk or just a teacher going in by themselves to identify their Tier 2 and Tier 3 students. I'm going to click on Start, and it will ask me if this is a Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3 student. I'm going to select Tier 2. And then there is a place for a goal. You probably want your goal to be as specific as possible. Because RTI is supposed to be targeted and intense, this program is designed to work on only one goal for a period of about 4 to 6 weeks. This is set up the way RTI is supposed to work, focusing on one narrowly constructed goal for a period of time. Once I've entered that one goal, I'm going to click Save. And now this student is identified as a Tier 2 student in reading in the RTI module and in her student profile. You'll notice that their Tier 2 designation is here, and here's the student's goal. Now that the student is identified, I can begin documenting her process. To document, I click on Add a Review. This documentation page has been designed to take as little time as possible to enter your documentation for your student. Click on the arrow to enter the date that you're documenting. Progress monitoring and universal scale score is next. That's PM or US. This is the score that the student received on the assessment that you're using to monitor their progress. This could be a MAP score, this could be a TPRI score, something to that effect. From here, you can enter what interventions you are trying for that student, what targeted skills you're using, what strategies you're trying for that particular student. And you have 3,000 characters to type in this box. You also have another 3,000 characters to explain additional comments. Under frequency is how often you're working with a student. Under duration is the period of time that you work with that student. Grouping, typically Tier 3 is one-on-one and Tier 2 is small group, but it depends on the needs of that particular child. And then under monitoring tools, This is just whatever tool it is that you are using to monitor this child on a weekly basis. It may be a running record, it may be a fluency check, something of that nature. And then the outcome and results is how is the student progressing for that period of time that you've worked with them. Are they satisfactory, unsatisfactory, or making progress? You can also type something in this box that gives more information about how well they're making progress. So maybe they have a 75% on their comprehension for that particular running record. Once you have saved that review, you can go back and edit it if necessary by clicking on the pencil. But that review will be summarized in this screen that you see right here. Every single time you go back and review that student, another line will appear on this table, most recent always being first, but you'll be able to see all of the reviews that were entered for that particular student. Reviews can be added daily or weekly for each of your students, and they can be added by anyone who has access to that student in the Edugence system. So the classroom teacher and the instructional specialist can both enter a review for this student during the week, and all of those reviews will be here visibly on one page for that particular student. As you add those reviews, they will accumulate, and you'll be able to see the progress of that student summarized here in your documentation. Now, when you're taking this student to commit, or if you're taking the student to ARD, you can also click on Print on this blue button to print a summary of the interventions for this particular student. But if it is an ARD situation, know that your diagnostician has full access to Edugence for your campus, and they'll be able to access the RTI module on their own as well. Now, after you've worked with a student for a period of time, if they need to move from Tier 2 to Tier 3 or back to Tier 1, or if they need to change their goal, simply click on the green box in order to change their tier or to change their goal. This is meant to be very fluid, a very flexible process, so you can change a student's tier or their goal at any point that you need to. If the student has made significant progress, you may want to move the student back to Tier 1, but yet leave them in the Interventions module so you can continue to progress monitor somewhat more infrequently, maybe every 3 weeks or so, just to kind of track how they're progressing. You can also change a student's goal if you need to make it a more difficult goal, to make it a different goal. If you have a student who's made a great deal of progress, and you feel as though they don't need to be monitored at any point in the future, then you can click on Stop. Stop will stop the progress monitoring. It will stop the intervention for that particular student, but all of the documentation that you have done stays in the system, so that the next school year, or even later on in the current school year, if something happens and the student does need to go back to Tier 2, you can restart that student's Tier 2 and still have all of their old documentation and just be able to pick up where you left off. Across the top, you'll see all the tabs for the different subject areas of RTI: reading, math, science, social studies, and behavior. You also have a parent log, which allows you to track parent communication, whether it's a phone call or a face-to-face visit. And you have a place for committee notes. This is where you can track meetings that you may have about a particular student in a more formal way. The last two tabs, Resources and Referrals, have not been populated yet. We have not decided how we want to use those tabs, but it's very possible that in the future there may be some additional resources for you there. Now, when we go back and refresh this page, when we go back to Ramos, you will see that now Morgan has been identified as a Tier 2 student in reading as well, with the date that she's been identified, and the note of how her progress is going so far in the RTI process. If I click on Morgan's name, it will bring me to the RTI tab in her student profile, and you'll see where she is right now in the RTI process, that she is currently active as a Tier 2 student with a goal of inferencing. And then when I click on history, I'll be able to see a summary of all of the documentation that has been taken for Morgan. Now, this page is not available to parents in Parent Portal. Parents will be able to see that the student is a Tier 2 student, what their goal is, and what date they were put in as a Tier 2 student. That's what parents will be able to see in Parent Portal. If you have questions about the expectations of RTI intervention and documentation, please contact the Curriculum Department.